I learned the exact weight of a marriage ending while holding a glass of warm champagne under a chandelier that cost more than my first truck. My wife did not shout it. She did not cry. Claire simply laughed, touched the stem of her wine glass with two polished fingers, and told a circle of people in tailored suits. Marrying Mark was the biggest regret of my life. The words crossed the ballroom like they had been looking for me. I stood 6 feet behind her, close enough to smell the expensive perfume I had bought her for Christmas, close enough to see Daniel Price grin like he had just won something. The Philadelphia Hotel ballroom was all gold light, white tablecloths, soft jazz, and people pretending money made them kinder than everyone else. Outside, rain slid down the tall windows in silver lines. Inside, my wife smiled like she had not just split 15 years of my life down the middle. Nobody noticed me at first. That was the part that almost made me laugh. I had spent most of our marriage being useful in quiet ways, fixing what broke, paying what was due, carrying boxes, building shelves, staying late at the shop so she could chase bigger rooms like this one. And now, in the biggest room she had ever dragged me into, I was invisible enough to hear the truth. Daniel leaned closer to her, his navy suit too sharp, his watch too loud, his teeth too white. "Come on, Claire," he said, pretending to defend me while enjoying every second. "That sounds harsh." She tilted her head, the way she did when she wanted people to think she was being honest instead of cruel. "No, really," she said. "Mark is a good man. He is just not the life I was supposed to have." A few people gave that soft, uncomfortable laugh rich people use when they want to keep the mood alive and the victim quiet. I looked down at my left hand. My wedding ring caught the chandelier light. For a second, it looked like a small circle of fire. My thumb moved over it once. 15 years sat inside that band. Mortgage payments. Hospital waiting rooms. Snowy mornings when I scraped ice off her windshield before my own. Nights I ate cold dinner at 10:30 because her open house ran late and I wanted her to come home to something warm. I remembered the first apartment we rented, the one with the radiator that hissed like an old cat and windows that shook every time a bus passed. Claire used to sit on the floor with me eating takeout from paper containers, telling me that my hands made her feel safe. Those same hands were rough now from walnut, oak, sawdust, and work she had learned to be embarrassed by. Daniel's voice cut in again. "Some men build furniture because they cannot build a life." The circle laughed harder this time. Claire looked down, smiling into her glass. She did not stop him. She did not even try. That was the moment. Not her sentence. Not his joke. Her smile. I felt something inside me go still, not dead, just done moving toward her. I set my champagne on a passing waiter's tray. The tiny clink sounded louder to me than the laughter. Claire finally saw me. Her face changed, but only a little. Surprise first, then annoyance. Like I had walked in on a conversation I was supposed to be too simple to understand. "Mark," she said, smooth and low. "I didn't know you were standing there." I nodded once. My throat was dry, but my voice came out calm. That surprised me. Maybe pain has a point where it stops shaking and turns into steel. I heard enough. Daniel gave a small laugh, the kind men use when they think the room belongs to them. "Hey, no offense, buddy. We were just talking." I looked at him, then back at my wife. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask her to explain. I did not give her the gift of watching me break in public. I only reached for my wedding ring, slid it over my knuckle, and placed it on the cocktail table between us. Claire stared at it like she did not recognize the thing she had worn beside her own ring for 15 years. Around us, the ballroom noise thinned. The jazz kept playing, but it sounded farther away now, like it was coming from another life. "Then let me remove your biggest regret from your life," I said. Her lips parted. For once, Claire Reynolds had no polished answer ready. I turned before she could find one. Each step toward the exit felt strange, heavy, and light at the same time. Behind me, someone whispered my name. Maybe Claire. Maybe someone who suddenly remembered I existed. I did not turn around. The doorman opened the glass doors, and cold March rain hit my face like clean water. I stood under the hotel awning, looking at the wet street, the headlights, the taxis sliding past, and I realized something I should have understood years earlier. A man does not lose his life when someone stops valuing him. He loses it when he keeps begging them to see what was always there. The rain had turned the sidewalk into a mirror by the time I reached my truck. I sat behind the wheel for a full minute with the engine off, watching the hotel doors through the windshield. People kept drifting out under umbrellas, laughing, checking their phones, stepping carefully around puddles and shoes that cost more than my monthly shop rent used to be. My hands rested on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, steady as if I was waiting at a red light, instead of sitting at the edge of a life I had spent 15 years trying to hold together. Then Claire came through the doors. She did not run. Claire never ran unless someone important was watching. She walked fast, one hand holding her coat closed, her dark hair shining with rain, her face tight with that controlled anger she used when she wanted to sound wounded instead of guilty. Daniel followed a few steps behind her, looking amused until he saw me still sitting there. Claire tapped on the passenger window. I lowered it halfway. Cold air rolled into the cab, carrying the smell of wet pavement and expensive perfume. "You embarrassed me," she said. "Not, I am sorry. Not, I should not have said that. You embarrassed me." I looked at her through the rain-streaked glass and felt the last soft part of me fold itself away. "I embarrassed you?" I asked. My voice stayed quiet. That seemed to bother her more than shouting would have. She glanced back at Daniel, then leaned closer. "You made a scene." I almost smiled. I had placed a ring on a table and walked away. That was all. But to Claire, silence from a man she was used to controlling felt like rebellion. Daniel stepped under the awning and raised both hands like a man pretending to calm a situation he helped create. "Mark, nobody meant anything serious in there," he said. "You know how these events are? People joke." I looked past Claire at him. His suit was dry because he had stayed undercover. Mine was damp because I had walked through the storm. That told me enough about both of us. "Funny," I said. The joke sounded a lot like my marriage. Claire's eyes sharpened. "Do not be dramatic." There it was again. The old trick. Turn the wound into overreaction. Turn the insult into sensitivity. Turn her choices into my problem. I had lived inside that trick for years without naming it. I would come home tired from the shop, smelling like cedar and stain, and she would wrinkle her nose before kissing my cheek. I would tell her about a new client, and she would say, "That is nice," then spend 20 minutes talking about someone else's lake house in the Poconos. Little things. Small cuts. Nothing big enough to make a man leave. Just enough to make him forget what standing tall felt like. "Drive home," she said. "We will talk there." She reached for the door handle. I locked it. The click was small, but her face changed like it had echoed across the whole street. "Not tonight," I said. "Mark." My name came out as a warning. It used to work. I would soften. I would explain myself until she found a way to make my pain inconvenient. But something had shifted back in that ballroom, somewhere between her smile and my ring hitting the table. "Ride with Daniel," I said. The words landed clean. Claire blinked once. Daniel's grin faded. "Excuse me," she said. I started the engine. The truck rumbled to life, old but faithful, the kind of machine that did not care who laughed at it as long as it still turned over when asked. "You chose your audience," I said. "Let them take you home." Her hand stayed frozen near the handle. Rain dotted her coat. For the first time all night, she looked less polished. "Not sorry, just uncertain. There is a difference." Daniel cleared his throat. "Come on, Claire. Let him cool off." She did not look at him. She looked at me, and I saw the calculation begin. How far would I go? How long before I apologized for making her uncomfortable? How quickly could she pull me back into the old rhythm where I was the steady one, the forgiving one, the one who made sure the house did not fall apart no matter who cracked the foundation? I put the truck in drive. "I am done cooling off," I said. Then I pulled away from the curb, leaving the hotel lights behind me, and in the rearview mirror, I saw Claire standing beside Daniel under the awning, smaller than she had looked inside. I drove 20 miles through rain without turning on the radio. The wipers moved back and forth like a slow clock, counting the seconds between the man I had been and the man I was becoming. Every few minutes my phone lit up in the cup holder. Claire. Claire again. Then a text. Then another. I did not touch it. There is a strange kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to win an argument that was designed to keep you small. I passed our exit first. The house sat in that direction, a white colonial at the end of a quiet street in Montgomery County, with boxwoods Claire had picked because they looked expensive in a 2-car garage I had organized twice a year, while she told guests I was obsessive about tools. That house had my fingerprints in every corner. I had built the bookshelves in the den, repaired the back deck, installed the kitchen island, replaced the porch light after a winter storm knocked it loose. But that night, I kept driving. Home was not a place anymore. It was just a building full of things that had learned to pretend with us. I took the county road toward my workshop instead. Reynolds Custom Interiors sat behind an old brick feed mill I had bought cheap before the area got fashionable. The sign out front was weathered, the parking lot uneven, the roof patched in 3 places. Claire used to call it charming when we were young. Later, she called it embarrassing. The garage door groaned as it lifted, and the smell met me before I stepped inside. Sawdust, walnut oil, cold concrete, honest things. I turned on one row of lights, and the shop came awake in pieces. A half-finished dining table rested on sawhorses near the back wall. Cabinets for a brownstone. Renovation lined the left side, sanded smooth, waiting for finish. My old coffee maker sat beside a stack of invoices, ugly and dependable. I stood there in my damp suit, surrounded by the only room in my life that had never lied to me. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. 23 missed calls. 8 messages. The last one said, "You are acting insane." I stared at those words until they blurred into something almost funny. I had not raised my voice. I had not insulted her. I had not told anyone in that ballroom what it felt like to watch your wife laugh, while another man turned you into a punchline. I had simply left. And somehow, that made me the unstable one. I took off my suit jacket, hung it on the back of a chair, and rolled up my sleeves. Habit moved my hands before grief could. I checked the clamps on the dining table, ran my palm along the edge, found one rough spot near the corner, and sanded it down with slow, even strokes. Back and forth, back and forth. Work has a mercy to it. Wood does not ask what you are feeling. It only asks whether you are willing to be patient enough to make something solid. Around midnight, headlights swept across the frosted front windows. I stopped sanding. The engine outside cut off. A car door closed. Then heels clicked across wet pavement. Claire entered without knocking, because for 15 years she believed every place I occupied still belonged to her in some way. She stood near the front desk, rain shining on her coat, mascara still perfect, anger pulled tight across her face. "So this is where you ran," she said. I set the sandpaper down. I did not run. Her eyes moved around the shop, like she was looking for proof of my failure and finding too many finished pieces to be comfortable. "You humiliated me in front of people who matter." I wiped sawdust from my hands with a clean rag. "You humiliated me in front of people you wanted to impress." She laughed once, sharp and empty. "This is exactly what I mean, Mark. You always make everything about your pride." I looked at the table between us, the one I had spent 3 weeks shaping from raw walnut. Strong legs, clean lines, no shortcuts. "No, I said. For years, I made everything about keeping peace." She stepped closer. "Then come home and keep it." There it was. Not love, not regret. Management. I picked up my truck keys from the bench and slipped them into my pocket. "I am staying here tonight." Her expression cracked for half a second, just enough for me to see fear behind the anger. Then she covered it with a colder voice. "Fine. Sleep next to your lumber." I nodded toward the door. "Drive safe, Claire." She waited for me to chase the conversation. I did not. The silence grew until it made her uncomfortable enough to leave. When the door shut behind her, the shop settled again, and I realized the quiet did not feel empty. It felt earned. By sunrise, the rain had stopped, but the shop still smelled like a storm had walked through it. My suit jacket hung over the chair, wrinkled and out of place, like some stranger had left it behind. I woke up on the small leather couch in my office with a stiff neck, a dry mouth, and the kind of silence that makes a man remember every bill he ever paid to keep a roof over people who stopped looking up. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the blueprints pinned to the wall, the coffee mug with a crack near the handle, the framed photo of my father standing in this same building before the sign ever had my name on it. That brought me back. I made coffee strong enough to stain regret, and stood by the front windows while the first trucks rolled down the road. At 7:12, Claire texted me one sentence. "We need to divide things like adults." I stared at the screen and felt nothing dramatic. No shock, no collapse, just a small, tired confirmation. By 9 o'clock, she was in my office with a folder, dressed in cream wool and confidence, sitting across from me as if this was a listing appointment and not the end of our marriage. Daniel was not with her. That was smart. She laid the folder on my desk, tapped it once, and said, "I spoke with someone this morning." Someone meant an attorney. Claire always softened sharp objects before handing them to you. I opened the folder. Divorce paperwork. Preliminary asset notes. A printed estimate. Of the house. Bank accounts. Retirement accounts. And there, near the bottom of the second page, my workshop, reduced to one cold line of ink. Business asset subject to division. I read it twice. Not because I was afraid. Because I wanted to remember the exact moment she tried to put a price tag on the only thing she had never believed in. You want half of the shop? I asked. She crossed one leg over the other. I want what is fair. Fair. That word can sound clean when it comes from someone holding a mop over the mess they made. I leaned back and looked around the office. The scarred desk. The old filing cabinet. The shelves I built from leftover maple during our 3rd year of marriage because we could not afford furniture. Claire followed my eyes and gave a small sigh. Do not turn this into a sentimental speech. I almost thanked her for saving me the trouble. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a black binder. Her eyes narrowed. She had seen it before, but she had never cared enough to ask about it. Before my father died, I said, he put this building and the original equipment into the Reynolds family trust. The trust predates our marriage by 4 years. The room tightened. Claire blinked once, slowly. That cannot be right. I slid a copy of the trust summary across the desk. It is. She picked it up with 2 fingers, like paper could embarrass her. I watched her read the first page, then the second. Her mouth changed shape, not falling open, not trembling, just losing the practiced line she used in public. The business grew during the marriage, she said. The income did, I said. And you will get what the law says you get. But this building, the original shop assets, the name, and the current contracts tied to the trust structure are not the jackpot you thought they were. Her eyes lifted. Current contracts? That was the first honest note in her voice all morning. I closed the binder gently. A hotel group signed last week. 3 properties. Custom lobbies, bar fronts, suites, and conference rooms. 18 months of work. Claire stared at me as if I had spoken in a language she used to mock and suddenly needed to understand. Why did you not tell me? She asked. I looked at the divorce folder between us, then back at her. Because you stopped asking what I was building. You only asked why I still smelled like sawdust. For once, she had no answer. Outside, sunlight moved across the shop floor, touching the unfinished walnut table like a hand blessing something that had survived. Claire left the shop with the trust papers in her hand and a silence around her that felt heavier than anger. I watched her car pull out of the lot, tires whispering over wet gravel, and for the first time in years, I did not wonder where she was going. I only turned back to the walnut table and kept sanding. That was the strange thing about the morning after a marriage breaks open. The world still expects invoices, measurements, phone calls, and coffee. A cabinet door still needs to hang straight. A client still needs a return call. Dust still settles whether your heart is steady or not. So I worked. By noon, my foreman, Luis Ramirez, came in carrying 2 paper bags from the diner down the road. He took one look at my face, set the food on the bench, and said, "You finally slept here, did you not?" I nodded. Luis had been with me for 9 years, long enough to know when not to ask too much. He handed me a breakfast sandwich wrapped in foil. Then eat before you start making bad cuts. That almost made me smile. Good men do that. They do not turn pain into theater. They hand you food and remind you the blade is sharp. After he left, I sat alone at the workbench and let memory come in quietly, not as a flood, but as dust and sunlight. Claire and I had not started rich. We started in a second-floor apartment above a laundromat in Norristown, where the dryers shook the floor every Saturday morning and the kitchen window looked out at a brick wall. She was studying for her real estate license then, surrounded by flashcards, highlighters, and big dreams. I was 27, working days at a cabinet shop and nights doing repairs for landlords who paid late and complained early. I remember coming home with cracked hands, finding Claire asleep at the table with her cheek against an open textbook. I would lift the pen from her fingers, cover her with my jacket, and make coffee for the morning. Back then, she called me steady like it was a compliment. She said my hands made the world feel less frightening. When her exam fee came due and we were short, I sold my old bass guitar and told her I had not played much anyway. When she needed clothes for her first brokerage interview, I worked 2 weekends installing trim in a house out near King of Prussia and pretended I was not exhausted when we went shopping. The first time she closed a sale, we celebrated with grocery store cupcakes and sparkling cider because champagne was still something other people bought. She cried in my arms that night, saying, "We are building something, Mark." I believed her. That sentence became a beam inside me. We are building something. So I built. I built shelves for her first office because she said clients trusted rooms that looked successful. I built her confidence on mornings when rejection made her want to quit. I built a life around the idea that her dream and my dream were not competing roads, just two lanes heading the same direction. But somewhere along the way, her dream started needing an audience. Then the audience started needing a costume. Then I became the part of the picture she could not edit into luxury. The flannel shirts, the work boots, the truck with a cracked dashboard, the smell of stain in my hair. She used to kiss sawdust off my cheek. Later, she asked me to shower before sitting on her furniture. I should have heard the difference sooner. But love can make a man explain away the weather until he is standing in a flood, still calling it rain. The next 6 months did not feel like a comeback while I was living them. They felt like 5:10 every morning, black coffee in a chipped mug, and the shop heater coughing awake before the sun touched the windows. They felt like invoices spread across my desk, lumber deliveries at dawn, and my hands aching so deep at night that even sleep had to work around them. People like to imagine success arriving with music playing and doors flying open. Mine arrived in steel-toed boots, carrying a clipboard, asking if the measurements were right. The hotel contract Claire had learned about was only the first wave. The group wanted character, not catalog furniture. They wanted lobbies that felt handmade, bar fronts with weight and warmth, suites that did not look copied from every glossy magazine in America. That was my language. Walnut, white oak, brass rails, leather banquettes, clean joints, honest grain. I walked through the first property in downtown Philadelphia with Louise and a project manager named Hannah Wells, a woman with sharp eyes and no patience for excuses. She ran her finger along a sample panel I had brought and said, "Can your team do this at scale?" I looked at the wood, then at the empty lobby with its concrete floors and hanging wires. "We can," I said, "but not if you want cheap." She smiled like that was the first honest answer she had heard all week. We signed the final production schedule the following Monday. By Friday, I had hired 4 more people, including 2 older craftsmen who had been pushed out of bigger shops for being too slow. Too slow usually meant too careful. I needed careful. I needed men who understood that a crooked line hidden behind a wall still mattered because you knew it was there. At night, after everyone went home, I stayed behind and swept the floor myself. Not because I had to, because the rhythm kept me human. Broom across concrete, dust into pile, lights clicking off one row at a time. Sometimes my phone would glow with emails from my attorney. Sometimes Claire's name would appear attached to some new demand, some revision, some complaint about fairness. I read what needed reading and ignored the rest. No emotional debates, only documented facts. That rule saved me more than pride ever could. The divorce moved forward in rooms with beige walls and conference tables that made everything sacred sound administrative. Claire wore calm like makeup. She asked for the house. I gave her the house. She wanted the newer car. I gave her the car. She expected me to fight over furniture, art, patio sets, the imported dining chairs she once said were too nice for my work clothes. I let them go. Her attorney looked surprised. Claire looked suspicious. They did not understand. I was not surrendering. I was making space. There are things a man owns that weigh more than they are worth. By the end of summer, Reynolds Custom Interiors had trucks leaving before sunrise and lights burning after dark. The first hotel opened with our work in every corner. People touched the bar top as they walked in. They took photographs under the ceiling beams we had built. A local design writer called the lobby warm, masculine, and unforgettable. I read the article alone in my office, with sawdust on my jeans and coffee gone cold beside me. My name sat there in print, not as somebody's husband, not as someone's disappointment, but as the man behind the work. I did not cheer. I did not cry. I just leaned back, looked through the office window at my crew moving across the shop floor, and felt something inside me settle into place. Not happiness exactly. Something sturdier. Proof. That evening, Luis knocked on the doorframe and said, "Boss, you should see this." He held up his phone. The hotel had posted photographs online, and the comments were already filling up. Beautiful. Timeless. Who made this? I handed the phone back and looked at the half-finished pieces waiting under the lights. For years, Claire had treated my work like the smell I brought home on my clothes. Now strangers were calling it art. Funny thing about value. Some people only recognize it after someone else puts a spotlight on it. By early fall, the second hotel project had become the kind of job that changes how people say your name. Not louder, more carefully. The kind of carefully that comes when they realize the man they used to overlook now has a calendar they cannot buy their way onto. I was standing in the lobby of the new Rittenhouse property on opening night, wearing a charcoal suit that still felt less natural than work boots, when I saw Claire across the room. For a second, my mind did what old pain does. It tried to turn her into memory. The woman in the cream dress from years ago, laughing over takeout on our apartment floor. The woman who used to fall asleep with real estate flashcards spread around her like fallen leaves. But the woman near the entrance was not that Claire. This Claire wore a black dress, a careful smile, and eyes that moved too quickly, measuring every face, every camera, every opportunity. Daniel Price stood beside her, one hand in his pocket, smiling at people who did not smile back with the same warmth. I had not seen him since the night at the ballroom. He looked polished from a distance. Up close, polish can look a lot like panic. Hannah Wells found me near the reception desk and handed me a glass of club soda. Investor group just arrived, she said. They want to meet the man responsible for making this place feel like it has a soul. I nodded, but my eyes stayed on Daniel. He was speaking to a gray-haired developer named Peter Lang, leaning in too close, selling something with his hands. Claire stood beside him, performing confidence, but her jaw was tight. Then Peter looked past Daniel and spotted me. His face opened with relief. "Mark Reynolds," he called, crossing the lobby with his hand extended. "There he is. The craftsman who saved this project from looking like an airport lounge." People turned. Not many. Just enough. Claire turned too. Her smile stalled. Daniel's mouth kept moving for half a second after the room had stopped listening to him. I shook Peter's hand. He clapped my shoulder and began telling the group how our team rebuilt the bar front after another vendor delivered late, how we stayed on budget, how I drove in myself at 2 o'clock in the morning to approve the final install because the grain pattern was not lining up the way it should. I heard the words, but I was watching Claire hear them. That was the twist life had been carving in silence. She had spent years making my work sound small. Now the very room she wanted to be seen in was standing on it. A woman from the investor group asked for my card. Then another. Someone mentioned a resort project in Vermont. Someone else asked if we accepted private residential commissions. Daniel's expression hardened, but he kept smiling because men like him understand appearances even when they are losing ground under their shoes. Then came the crack. Hannah stepped beside me, lowered her voice, and said, "You should know, Price has been trying to attach himself to the brokerage side of this deal for weeks. There are questions about his numbers." I glanced at her. She did not gossip. That made the words heavier. Across the room, Peter's assistant approached Daniel with a folder and a face that did not need to raise its voice to end a conversation. Daniel read the first page. The color left him slowly. Claire touched his arm, asking something I could not hear. He pulled away just enough for everyone nearby to notice. That small movement did more damage than a speech. Within minutes, the circle around him thinned. People checked their phones. Conversations redirected. Doors closed without closing. Claire stood alone beside a wall panel my team had built from hand-selected white oak, her fingers resting against the wood as if she needed something solid to keep her upright. Then she looked at the brass plaque near the entrance. Reynolds Custom Interiors. I watched her read it, watched her understand it. Not the business, not the contract. Me. For the first time since the divorce began, Claire saw the life she had called too small filling a room she had been desperate to enter. And I felt no triumph. That surprised me. I thought the moment would taste sweet. It tasted quiet, like setting down a weight I had carried so long I had forgotten it was not part of me. Claire did not come to me that night. Pride still had its hand on her shoulder, keeping her upright, keeping her painted smile in place until the photographers were gone and the investors had moved on to better conversations. I saw her once near the elevators, standing alone while Daniel argued into his phone in a corner of the lobby. She looked at me like someone watching a door close from the wrong side. I went back to my crew, shook hands, thanked Hannah, and left before the after-party started. The shop was quiet when I returned, the kind of quiet that belongs to buildings after honest work is done. I changed out of the suit, folded it over the chair, and put on jeans and an old gray sweatshirt. By midnight, I was sanding a sample panel under the warm light above my bench, not because it was urgent, but because my hands needed something true. Then headlights moved across the front windows. Slow, hesitant. A car stopped outside. I knew before the knock. Some sounds arrived before they happened. Claire stood at the door with rain in her hair and a small velvet box in her hand. No black dress now. No perfect room behind her. Just a beige coat, tired eyes, and the face of a woman who had spent the evening watching the ground shift under her. "Can I come in?" she asked. I opened the door wider and stepped back. She walked into the shop like it was a church she had once mocked and now needed to pray in. Her eyes moved over the tables, the stacked lumber, the finished panels waiting for delivery, the brass plaque samples lined up near my desk. She stopped at the walnut table from the spring, now finished, glowing under the light with a depth that made the grain look almost alive. "You kept it," she said. "Client delayed the order," I said. Her fingers brushed the edge. "It is beautiful." I did not answer. Compliments are strange when they arrive years late. She set the velvet box on the table and opened it. Inside was my wedding ring, the same small circle I had left under a chandelier in Philadelphia. For a second, the room seemed to hold its breath. "I took it that night," she said softly. "I do not know why. I told myself it was because you were being dramatic. Then I told myself it was because you would come home and ask for it back." She looked up at me. "But you never did." I leaned against the workbench, arms folded, feeling no anger rise. That scared me a little. Anger would have been easier. Anger still ties you to the person who hurt you. This was cleaner and colder. This was distance. Claire wiped at her cheek quickly, as if even now she did not want the room to witness too much. "Daniel is finished," she said. "The numbers were wrong. People are asking questions. My brokerage suspended me until they sort out what I knew and what I did not know." There it was. The storm had followed her here, but not because she missed the house we built. Because the house she chose had no foundation. "I am sorry," I said, and I meant it. In the decent human way, not the husband way. She heard the difference. Her mouth trembled. "I was wrong about you." I looked at the ring, then at her. "Yes." The word landed between us without cruelty. She nodded like she deserved that. "Maybe she did." "You were never small," she whispered. "I made you small because I wanted my choices to feel bigger." That one reached somewhere old in me, but it did not open the door. It only turned on a light. She stepped closer, voice breaking around the edges. "I want to come back, Mark. Not to the house. To you. I want to be yours again." The shop heater clicked on behind us, humming through the silence. I stared at the ring in the velvet box, and all I could see was myself months earlier, standing in a ballroom, finally understanding that love without respect is just a beautiful room with no floor. I looked at Claire standing beside the walnut table, with my old ring sitting between us like a question that had waited too long to be asked. Months earlier, I would have given anything to hear those words from her. I would have stepped over my own hurt, picked up the pieces, and called the cuts character. That was the man she knew. That was the man she came looking for. But he was not in the room anymore. I reached for the velvet box, closed it gently, and slid it back across the table. Claire stared at it, then at me, and the hope in her eyes began to understand before her heart did. "You do not want me back?" I said. My voice was not cold. That mattered. Cold would have meant I still needed to prove something. "You want the version of me you can no longer look down on." She shook her head quickly. "That is not fair." I almost smiled at the word. Fair had become her favorite tool after kindness stopped working. "Maybe not," I said, "but it is true." She pressed both hands against the edge of the table, the same table I had built while learning how to sleep alone, how to eat dinner without waiting for a door to open, how to hear silence without filling it with blame. "I loved you," she said. The sentence came out smaller than she expected. I nodded. "I think you loved what I gave you. Stability. Forgiveness. A man who always stayed. But you did not respect the person giving it." The heater hummed. Rain tapped lightly against the high windows. Outside, the gravel lot shone under the security light, empty except for her car and my old truck. There was no audience now. No Daniel. No ballroom. No champagne. Just two people standing in the place where the truth had nowhere fancy to hide. Claire wiped her face and looked around the shop again, slower this time. "So that is it," she asked. After 15 years? I looked at the saws, the clamps, the stacked oak, the finished panels waiting to be delivered before sunrise. 15 years had not vanished. They were in me, in my patience, in my caution, in the way I could recognize a polished lie by how smoothly it entered a room. No, I said, this is not after 15 years. This is because of them. Her shoulders dropped. For a second, I saw the woman from the apartment above the laundromat, the one who believed we were building something. I hoped she found her way back to herself someday. I just knew it would not be through me. I picked up the ring box and placed it in her hand. Keep it, I said, not as a promise, as a reminder. Her fingers closed around it. Of what? That some doors do not close because of anger. They close because the person on the other side finally learned peace. She stood there a little longer, waiting for the old rhythm to return, for me to soften the ending, for me to hand her a bridge back into my life because I had always been the builder. But not every bridge should be rebuilt. Some crossings only lead you back to the place that taught you how small you could become. When she finally walked out, I did not follow her to the door. I listened to her car start, pause, then pull away into the wet night. The sound faded down the road until the shop settled around me again. I opened the front windows just enough to let the rain-cooled air in, then turned back to the table. The walnut surface caught the light, smooth and steady, every grain line earned. By morning, my crew would arrive. The trucks would load. The next project would begin. That is how life really changes, not in one dramatic speech, but in quiet decisions repeated until they become a new foundation. A few weeks later, I moved into the small loft above the expanded showroom. Nothing fancy. Brick walls, pine floors, a black coffee maker, and windows facing east. On the first clear morning, sunlight poured across the room and landed on my hands. Rough hands, scarred hands, hands Claire once called safe, then ordinary, then not enough. I looked at them and finally understood. I had never been her regret. I had been her mirror. And when she could not stand what it showed her, she blamed the glass. But I was done being broken for someone else's reflection. I poured my coffee, walked downstairs, unlocked the showroom doors, and stepped into the clean morning light of a life I had built for myself.